Now, the African Development Bank is currently rated AAA by S&P Global Ratings. Konrad Reuss is the Managing Director and Regional Manager for Africa at S&P Global Ratings, joined CNBC Africa's Godfrey Mutizwa to discuss the health of the bank and the creditworthiness of African countries.
Yes, and it still is. Actually, as far as Standard & Poor's is concerned, S&P Ratings, the company I represent, it is a AAA with a stable outlook. And given that you just mentioned the 55 years, you mentioned my own history coming to these annual meetings, I want to mention as well that actually since the 1980s, we at Standard & Poor's, we've been rating the bank. So it is definitely in many ways our first ever rating on the continent. It goes back to the 1980s. Right. For quite many years, it was a AAA. There was a period where it wasn't, but since the mid to late 90s, now we are back to AAA with a stable outlook.
The stable outlook, is there any sense that it could be at risk?
If the rating would be at risk, we would move to a negative outlook. But as far as the bank is concerned, really, we think it is well managed. It has a strong capital cushion. It has strong shareholder support. Its capital adequacy ratios are very solid. Yeah. And we also we look at the mandate of the MLIs when we do rate MLIs. Yeah. And here again, the way the African Development Bank is doing its job on the continent is quite impressive.
Let's widen the look at the African picture in terms of the creditworthiness of African countries. It's an interesting time because it's almost like you can look at two divisions in Africa. You've got the star performers, so you've got your Ghanas, your Rwandas, your Ethiopians, etc. And then you've got some good guys who have been doing some very bad things, your Mozambiques, your Zambians, etc., etc. In general, though, how are we looking?
We've gone, obviously, and you're right in pointing out there are sort of pluses and minuses. We've gone through quite a bit of a credit cycle. You go back a few years, we had pressure on commodity prices, we had the sharp decline in oil prices, and that indeed put pressure on a lot of ratings around the continent, around sub-Saharan Africa. For instance, oil producers come to mind, like Nigeria, like Angola. They got downgraded as part of this cycle. But certainly when we at S&P Ratings, when we look at our ratings, we get the impression that we've gone through the worst part of the credit cycle. You look at some of the ratings we have, where we have positive outlooks now. We have a positive outlook on Senegal. We've got a positive outlook again on Rwanda. Last year we upgraded Ghana from a B- back to a single B. Again, there are not too many negative outlooks around. We've put a few new ratings out, Benin and Togo, for instance. So this is really the positive side, where we have really seen the credits go through the credit cycle and turning a corner. Yeah. Then, as you rightly mentioned, there are some where there is a concern. Mozambique, as far as our ratings at S&P are concerned, Mozambique is still in default. Yeah. And then you have countries like Zambia, where we clearly have a concern around debt sustainabilities. Governments like Zambia, in this case, they have leveraged up. They do face a rollover risk as bonds become due, and that clearly is a concern.
Yeah. So when you look again at the overall picture, what's the sense that you're getting? Are we beginning again to improve the things that are required to keep the outlooks that we have, and also, in fact, maybe hopefully to improve them? Or are we in danger of slipping back? And what are the characteristics that are marking out those that are the good performers versus those that are struggling?
I think we have clearly seen progress across the continent with regards to implementation of orthodox policies, of achieving macro stability. But again, across the region, I think the biggest concern we would have at S&P at the moment is with regards to indebtedness, with regards to leverage. Right. We published a very interesting piece last year where we looked at the countries we rate at the time of HIPC, the international debt relief, yes, for many of the low-income countries, and we looked at the situation today. In terms of leverage, we have almost gone back, or we have gone back where we were at the time of HIPC. So debt, if anything, that would be the increase in debt sustainability would be something to focus on. and where in a number of countries there is a greater concern than in others.
Yeah. Before I talk about some very specific cases, I wanted to ask about maybe amongst the star performers, do you see anyone potentially reaching for the stars for A somewhere in the near future, in the medium future?
That will still a long way to go. When you look at the ratings we have in Sub-Saharan Africa, pretty much across the board with one exception, that would be Botswana at an A-.
Are you maintaining it there? Because there have been some ructions in there as well.
We are maintaining this rating. We have a stable outlook on the rating. And for us, and again, it's a very different credit story compared to the other credits we have on the continent. It's a solid investment grade rating. The other ratings across the board these days would be non-investment grade. Many, as mentioned earlier, would be in the single B category. And then obviously there's one noticeable one that used to be investment grade but is not investment grade anymore. Yeah. That is South Africa, and there we are at a double B rating at the moment. And I'd like to stress as well, with a stable outlook.
Absolutely. So let's talk about South Africa now that you mentioned South Africa. We have seen a lot of noise post the elections around economic policy, around institutions that have been considered the bulwark, if you like, for South African credit story in the past few weeks. What are the risks that this could degenerate, and we could potentially see you guys perhaps relooking this?
We've obviously, in the case of South Africa, we've gone through quite a bit of a credit cycle and quite a number of downgrades. Yeah. The credit cycle for us at S&P really started in 2012 when we moved from like a BBB plus with a stable outlook to negative outlooks, and then successive downgrades that have brought us now to non-investment grade, to BB. Yeah. With the stable outlook and the rating we have at the moment, we are somewhat positive that we will see some progress with regards to structural reforms that would put some growth back into the South African economy. At the end of the day, this is really what is critical in South Africa's credit story at the moment, that we see South Africa going back to growth, which would have obviously a positive impact on the fiscal story, which is another one of the weaknesses, and it would have an impact on what we refer to as contingent liabilities, which has been probably in the more recent past now the key concern, contingent liabilities. And here we are talking about the state-owned companies or enterprises, in particular Eskom, where we have serious concerns.
Absolutely. And those serious concerns, are they being addressed? Because we've just now seen the CEO depart, and there's no CEO now. The government has to start again the process of finding another one.
Eskom itself, when we look at the S&P rating we have for Eskom, is a CCC+. So it's not at the level of the government. There's quite a number of notches in between. And the CCC rating as such really indicates that we have serious concerns with regards to the risk of default of an entity that would be rated in the CCC category. And that's where Eskom is. So we are clearly saying there is a risk of default, there's a high risk of default, and that significant measures have to be taken financially to put Eskom back on a sustainable path. And as we've seen with recent load shedding, also significant things have to be done on the operational side to put them back on a sustainable path. And
finally, Konrad, before you go, you've got to talk about Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy. When are we going to see an improvement in Nigeria's credit rating?
I've actually just been to Nigeria about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, there we go. Fresh news.
And actually compared to like maybe 12, 15 months ago, certainly in Lagos, the vibe was a lot better than 15, 18 months ago. We are in a post-election Nigeria as well. For Nigeria, we have a B rating at the moment with a stable outlook. We want to see what progress Nigeria can make with regards to bringing back broader-based growth into the economy, strengthening the fiscal side. Obviously, Nigeria at the moment, it is benefiting from a higher oil price. It has replenished foreign currency reserves, and we've seen the financial sector stabilizing, the banks stabilizing, but still a lot of work needs to be done.
And that was Konrad Reuss, is the Managing Director and Regional Manager for Africa at S&P Global Ratings.